Mr. De Soto, thank you for your time here today. Thank you for your eloquent words in defense of freedom and property. James Madison wrote in The Federalist that one of the chief objects of government is the defense of property rights that yield from the diverse faculties and efforts of men. But he also wrote that democracies have something of a checkered history of defending property rights, either because they tend to elect a strong man and you have the situation of one man, one vote, one time, or they yield to majority tyranny. And that's why he said that governments need internal controls as well as the external controls of elections. I think sometimes we focus too much on the democracy side overseas and not much on the constitutional side of constitutional democracy. Some of the institutional controls you've mentioned, an independent judiciary with life tenure and salary protection, rights of property, a free press, free religion, and so forth. In your opinion, is the United States government policy as well as international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank doing enough to focus on those constitutional arrangements? Or are we overemphasizing the simple fact of having elections in developing countries?
I think elections are obviously the right way to go, but they're obviously not only not sufficient, they may not even be the most important part of it. When we were doing the transformations in the Peruvian situation in the 1990s, when we were fighting one of the most deadly terrorist systems, which I was in charge of the civilian policy for fighting the Shining Path, democracy was part of it. But really, if you do not have congressmen that respond to districts, that therefore can be accountable to districts, that can go and shake people's hands and find out what the hell is going on down there. Okay, that democracy is not really a democracy. It doesn't feed into day-to-day decisions. It's really a sort of a beauty contest. And it happens all throughout Latin America. We do not have elections by district. So what is important in each of these cases is the following. If you want to do whatever it is that you want to do, you want to elect people, you want to make sure that your electoral lists, for example, as opposed to the ones that occur in Latin America, are really all alive, everybody that's voting for this political party, whether it be in Mexico or Peru. You better have an idea of who's living where, because otherwise your lists are going to be full of dead people that are going to swing this way and that way. You see that in Egypt. You see that in every Latin American country.
You see that in certain places in America.
You got that too. Pardon me? The third place is in America?
Certain places.
Okay, sure. It probably happens everywhere, but to the degree that it happens in ours, everything that goes wrong with us goes wrong in the United States. It's a question of degree. The degree to which we can be accountable without the information that property provides. Let me explain this, which is very important. One of the reasons that democracies don't know what to do, according to our opinion and what we've lived in Latin America, is essentially because there's no feedback. The only way you know if things are wrong is feedback. There is no, as Madeline said, there is no international formula for feedback. The Swiss have Vernehmlassungs, which are consultations of laws among people. They've got Landsgemeindes. They've got referendums. They change the Congresspeople sometimes once a year. They've got a variety of things that makes them make this pertinent decisions and know what their people want. The Japanese doesn't look like it because they've got a vertical government. But they have shingikais, kochukais, and a variety of means where they don't make a decision on one law without actually a proper consultation that can take years. There isn't one developed country that doesn't have a mechanism whereby it is continually accountable to the people. That, to me, is what distinguishes the West. But there's not one formula for it.
Yeah.
The British have surgery.
Is the policy of the United States government, as well as organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, are we focusing on that kind of institution, single-member districts, along with things like an independent judiciary to the degree we should?
Well, what happens is the following. It's that I think the IMF, that isn't in their role. It could be or it should be. But you have to bring in that part of it along with the IMF. I mean, we see, for example, in the case of our Egyptian friends, when they told us, okay, we're going to move on issues like property, empowering the poor, but let's settle with the IMF before, what we tell them is that the reason we made successful negotiations with the IMF and turned the country around was because you can't just squeeze people put them into an austerity program, and give them nothing instead. If everybody is already on land, if everybody already owns a business, if there are ways to easily recognize who is on what parcel through a variety of different means that you were able to do in the United States just 2 centuries and a century ago, and MacArthur was able to do in Japan just 50 years ago, why don't you launch that at the same time? So one of the problems that the world has, of course, is that you've specialized different organizations in different aspects, macroeconomics. And for the issue of property, or if you want to, the rights of common people, who happen to be the majority of the population of the third world, but by far, there is no organization that deals with us. You have ideals. There is no organization that deals with that. But what you can do, certainly with your aid, is condition into the looking to the legitimacy of the decisions that are taken. But IMF doesn't have them. IMF is macroeconomics. The other thing we're talking about is microeconomics. And that is why I also said before that I really think, because we've got such little time on this, that one of the major moves that you can make in the United States is understand that all of these things we're talking about, you have left and abandoned to the hands of technicians. In the case of property, it's realtors. You're measuring land. That's not what it's about. The problem is access to law. And what you can do in that sense is look at your success in the past. MacArthur's policy was, when he got into Japan, to change the feudal system and to make sure that it had roots and it was sustainable over time. He prepared a plan in 1942 that started with a man called Wolf Ladijinski in Hawaii. And the plan was, how do we win the war first, and then how do we win the peace? And whole Japan was restructured and put in a democratic system where all the Wazizis were empowered. When that was done, he said, and as time went by, and he said, our man Chiang Kai-shek is losing the war against Mao. We will, on the other hand, be empowering these other 3 countries. They will get rich, they will be like thorns in the side, and eventually China will turn to be in a market economy. Quote MacArthur, quote Wolf Ladijinski. So there are things that you can do, even if you're not winning a war, that you can tell people how to do it, how to do these things. You have to remember what were your successes and what was your own past. And it wasn't only about macroeconomics. What has happened with economists, unfortunately, it is that everything that relates to growth, we economists have become monopolies on that. And everything that relates to experience, we've passed to the history departments. So it's about time you got both of them together and remembered, why were you able to win in Japan? Why weren't you able to do it in Afghanistan? Who holds the property rights in Afghanistan? Who holds the rights of oil in Libya? Why do settlement policies actually gain territory versus territorial policies? These are things that you've done, you've been seen in the past, and you've got to bring back, but you've got to bring back from another century. This is nothing that can be solved with global positioning systems. This is about people. And you've got people in blue jeans, I repeat, sneakers and T-shirts, buying and selling. If I take the entrepreneurs that are willing to march the streets of Arabian countries in defense of their right to property, in defense of the right to do business, you outnumber Al-Qaeda 100,000 to 1. You've got to find ways to recognize those who are on your side, and you don't have them. And you're not going to get that through technical committees. If you keep on putting real estate vendors in charge of your property programs, you're just going to get better measurement. This is the time for politicians. That's what politics is about. They'll figure their own way out. But you can push them in the direction, since people do look up to you. You are successful. They might not like you. Lots of us in the third world don't like you. But we can't help but recognize that you're the most successful nation in the world. But you have to understand, we are all in the third world in the 19th century. You can't address us as we were in the 21st century.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. De Soto.